Americanism, not globalism, will be our credo. I just want
In the days after the September attacks, there were countless rumors about strange coincidences surrounding the events. One report about a group of Middle Eastern men spotted the morning of September 11th parked just across the river from New York City has not gone away. Investigation of their presence has led to questions about whether Israel was conducting espionage on U.S. soil.
They don't understand the things I say on Twitter. They don't understand the things I say on Twitter. All my niggas Nazis, nigga, how Hitler. If I don't run your media, someone else will. If I don't edit Wikipedia, someone else will. If I don't limit your reach, someone else will. If I don't censor speech, someone else will. If I don't blow up your kids, someone else will. If I don't attack U.S. ships, someone else will. If I don't steal your things, someone else will. If I don't run pedo rings, it's not my fault that I have to do this. You only pick on me because I'm Jewish. Stop being a jealous loser and go get a job. The worst person is
His name is, what the hell? How did he ever end up in Kentucky? His name is Thomas Massey.
Everyone wants a strong mind, but most people refuse to build the body that protects it. The Stoics understood this. They trained daily because a weak body creates a weak spirit, and a weak spirit collapses under pressure. When your body quits easily, your mind quits even faster. When you let yourself get soft, your discipline dies with it. But when you train, truly train, your thoughts sharpen, your emotions steady, and your will becomes dangerous. A strong body isn't about vanity. It's armor. Armor against fear, against laziness, against the part of you that wants the easy path. If you want resilience, train. If you want clarity, train. If you want to control your life, train. Because the person who cannot command their own body will never command their mind.
We are looking only to the future. We assembled here today are issuing a new decree to be heard in every city and in every hall of power. From this day forward, a new vision will govern our land. From this day forward, it's going to be only America first.
Welcome to the Kacee Allen Show. I'm your host, Kacee Allen. We have a great show for you guys today. This is episode 100. I am glad to actually reach that milestone. It took much longer than I thought it would. We're actually just about to approach our 3-year anniversary of this show, in which we'll celebrate next show. Will be episode 101 this coming Monday. So yeah, almost 3 years doing this. It's pretty wild. But like I said, we have a lot to talk about today. We've been talking about the same thing for the last couple of days. If you check my profile online, we talk about Joe Kent, the National Counterterrorism Director who resigned. And boy, has this been making a wave online. I mean, literally the entire Trump firsters, the Israel firsters, these guys have gone crazy calling Joe Kent a patriot, a veteran who served 20 years overseas and even lost his wife in combat, is now being attacked as this, terrible person, traitor, a guy that's basically was a Trump loyalist his entire life. And or at least during his political life, he was very loyal to Trump. And just because he really realizes what's going on with this war, that we're doing this for Israel, not for the United States, that now he gets the real criticism. He gets all this anti-Semitism backlash from not only the left media, but the right as well. So you're having Fox News team up on him. You're having the Mark Levins, Laura Loomers, and you're even having like CNN. You're having MSNBC and people like The View that are literally saying that this guy is not in his right mind and he's only fueling more anti-Semitism. But I mean, here's the reality. It is the truth that we are in this conflict because of Israel and because of our leaders being compromised by the Israel lobby, by weapons manufacturers, and by the actual state of Israel. And you also have to take in consideration the Christian Zionists who have been major in this entire time. You talk about like Pete Hegseth, people that are literally putting their Christian interests aside, posing as Christians, but really fulfilling Judaism and the prophecy that's going to bring back the Messiah in Israel and their third temple, which is completely contradictory if you're a Catholic and main Christian beliefs. So with that being said, we're going to be talking about this entire deal with Joe Kent, and we're going to be reacting to the actual 2-hour interview that he just went on Tucker Carlson last night or the night before. And it was really telling that he did this. And I'm really surprised that he did this, considering the heat that he's facing. It really shows that this is a stand-up guy that really does care about this country. And again, we can get into his past. He's not always been like this. Again, this guy was someone who decided to betray people, and well, not really betray, but he said that he would support a particular person. It was Nick Fuentes and the Groypers when he ran for Congress, I believe a couple years ago. And then I guess all of a sudden he just went behind their back and made this public statement condemning the entire America First movement, saying that because of their anti-Israel views that he can't be aligned with them and Fuentes. So it's just funny to see him come full circle now and actually realize this is probably the truth. Hey, like, there's some vindication here. And again, I'm not going to be one of those guys that like criticizes him because he didn't wake up sooner, because he, switches views. Well, you know what? Everyone switches their views at some point, especially after October 7th. You saw people like Tucker Carlson, you saw Candace Owens, even myself. We really woke up to the real problem. So if you're changing your views for the better of America and to actually help this country, then you know what? Better late than never. Come join the right side of history. Because it's literally, we have a civilization, we have a country to save. And honestly, I'm kind of past the whole beef stuff. Like, we need to work together. We need to figure out a way to speak truth and to stop this obfuscation, this complete heresy to Christianity in our country. And that's where someone like Joe Kent is going to be paying the price forever because of this. And people really do underscore how big of a deal this is. And how rare we see something like this. A public official as high as he is. I mean, keep in mind, he is the head of was the head of counterterrorism, meaning any domestic threat. This is the top dog that Trump appointed to make sure that America is safe and really scope out what the real threats are to America. And we've been told the past year and more the past 6 months that Iran is that threat. And that if Iran gets nuclear weapons, they're the number one existential threat to our safety in America, when that's totally not the truth. I mean, I think anyone who, first of all, went through Iraq and saw how that was a sham should know better that this is totally for Israel, and it's totally to help their Greater Israel Project and just really fulfill their foreign policy that, again, is not in our interest. How could you say that 4,000 dead soldiers in Iraq is America first? What did we win from that? We gained nothing from that. It was false intelligence, and we lost. Just like we're going to lose this war with Iran. Because we're under the same illusion that if they get nuclear weapons, they're going to first take out Israel, then they're going to take out the United States. I've said this a million times, but I think it's worth reiterating. The reason that this is happening is because Iran, over the last 50 years, really since 53, ever since 48, I guess you could say, since the Arab-Israeli wars, they have not accepted the Israeli state, and rightfully so, because they've overthrown all of their neighbors. And Iran is the last on the agenda. They're the last resistance. Really with the hegemonic dominance of Islam in the Middle East. And Iran seeks to protect itself, to have a deterrent to Israel, who already has nuclear weapons. Keep in mind, they've got secret nuclear weapons. And Iran literally just, they fear being overthrown. They actually want to protect themselves. I mean, what's wrong with that? You can obviously see how if, let's just say hypothetically, Mexico and Canada get overthrown by China, the United States is probably going to want to protect itself and act in our interest to make sure we're not next. And that's what Iran's thinking. Whatever they may say that these people are thinking, or whatever they really try to equate this whole like 30,000 protesters dead, and they're just innocently they're killing innocent people in the streets, and some of that is probably true. But again, the whole protest thing, that's totally CIA Mossad backed. Pretty clear what that was. They're just trying to incite anything possible to get people in really in a position to support this war on all sides. Obviously the Israelis do. They're trying to say that the Iranians do, and they even want to, like you saw Trump say, he's really trying to encourage the Iranians to overthrow their own country. Yeah, how's that for democracy for you? So yeah, it's a pretty crazy scenario here. And again, it goes back to Iran is not the threat. They really are not. If you want to talk about the real threat in the Middle East, it's our greatest ally, as they'd like to say. They've been the one that have pushed us into these conflicts. They are responsible for the false intelligence. And again, this isn't just them. I think like Glenn Beck said this the other day, and it's again, as much as I disagree with him, he's total Zionist shill. He's actually is right about this. Is the fact that we have to put fair blame on U.S. officials as well. Obviously Israel is totally be at fault, but like we do have to blame, the Bush administration, the 2004, 2003 Iraq, Lebanon, Libya, Syria, even under Obama. You could say Biden had. October 7th happened under him. So, it's fair to blame U.S. officials, just like now, Trump, Rubio, Hegseth. These guys are the new neocons. They are the modern day neocons. They're the Colin Powells, the Dick Cheneys, and that they are the real threat if you really talk about it. It's these people that genuinely want this war. They want to help Israel build itself up at the detriment of us. And again, that is what Joe Kent said. That is what he made clear. And if this wasn't true, let's just say that there was no valid, there's no validity to this argument. It was just some crazy conspiratorial thing. Well, it would just get brushed off and it wouldn't have gotten this much backlash and this much attention. But that wasn't the case because it is the truth. And it validates what many people have been saying for the longest time. It vindicates what I've said is that, yes, America is under siege. We are not in control of our foreign policy. It is completely controlled and it's being undermined by this foreign state and a certain lobby that is the most powerful lobby this country's ever seen. And that's something people would never fully understand to this day, that, the Fox News boomers, they still don't get it. They don't understand how $300 million can influence an election and make someone completely change their mind. They just don't understand. If you don't get that, I just don't think you understand how the system works, and you probably never will. But it's like, these are the things that are really affecting our country here. It's this whole foreign infiltration like we've never seen before. In 1776, it was the British. We declared our independence from them because they tried to essentially take us over. And now it's the same deal in 2026. It's like we need to declare our independence from the Israel lobby, this heretic Christian Zionist movement that's infiltrating our churches. And it's also this, this obviously detrimental effect of having our foreign policy controlled in the Middle East, losing $7 trillion plus. Our debt is officially at $39 trillion. More soldiers lost than we could ever imagine or ever need. Not one of them was even necessary to die. In this case, I think we're up to about 30 casualties in the Iran war of 2026. All this could have been avoided. And that's what people have been saying for the longest time, the ones that are on the right side of history and know what's going on. But you're going to have the Ben Fergusons, the Ted Cruzes, all of Trump's shills, and you know who they are. Gunther Eagleman, Eric Daugherty, Cat Turd, Dan Bongino. These are paid Trump operatives that are literally lying to you and completely capitulating and doing a 180 on their anti-war views and America First views, acting like that's still the same thing as they're moving the goalpost. These people are arguably some of the biggest traitors this country's ever seen. And yeah, they're not in positions of power. Bongino was, but these influencers are just absolutely, they're betraying their country for the Israel lobby. They just need to be discredited for life. I'm not saying anything should happen. I'm not even saying they should be arrested. The ones that are, hold on. Okay. The ones that are taking money from the Israel lobby and not disclosing it, and especially that are violating FARA, yeah, they should certainly be fined or even jailed if they have to. I would think Mark Levin and all, Laura Loomer, if we had a real America First FBI, they would be looking to them right now. Not making any accusations. I'm just maybe giving a helpful tip, because that is the problem. Again, all these people will never win this argument when they try to say, well, China influences our political lobby. Well, what about Qatar? What about, all these other lobbies. It's like, no, you cannot equate to how, 90% of our Congress is bought by AIPAC. The president of the United States took $230 million from that lobby. I think maybe even more than that, to be honest. Yeah. It's just like, that is literally what it is. It's that easy to understand. It's, yes, politics isn't right versus left. It is literally the donors. It's money. That is the core of the system. If you understand how that works, if you follow the money, that'll really tell you where the power structure lies. And you can really predict what these people are going to do next. That's how I kind of started to figure out Trump early on. And I've kind of came off the Trump train a little bit earlier than everybody else. I mean, I voted for him. I'll say that was obviously a mistake at this point, but I got my first suspicion during about 2 weeks after when he got elected, when he appointed Rubio, Susie Wiles. He picked out total neocon cabinets, or basically filled his staff with neocons. So that was the first red flag. And then I really jumped off the Trump train about last summer during it was Operation Midnight Hammer, when Iran, Israel, and the United States were in that 12-day war. And again, just like this time, Israel and the United States, they attacked first. I mean, it's completely unprovoked. And that's where I literally called for Trump's impeachment. I said he did not even get congressional approval, again, just like this time. And he's just launching these reckless wars of aggression that's going to get more troops killed. It's going to get, trillions of dollars wasted, and our national debt and inflation. It's just going to destroy this country. And it's the exact opposite of America First, is the antithesis of that. But yet some people still cannot get it through their thick skulls and understand that these people have literally betrayed you. I mean, I figured this out when literally Trump said about a year ago, I think it was like January or February. It was like the first month that he was actually in office. I mean, he even said the mass deportations. He said, we're only going after violent criminals, and we're not going to be targeting, this whole mass deportation campaign where we're going to get, 10 to 15 million deportations in 4 years or something crazy like that. No, they immediately capitulated. It's like they got our votes, and then they just went with what the donors wanted. Same thing with legal immigration. I mean, you talk about H-1Bs. I mean, Trump literally campaigned on, this America First, the American people come first, no more immigrants. Like, oh yeah. Then he goes to Silicon Valley and David Sachs, and he goes and says, yeah, we'll give you endless H-1Bs. And then, the one thing that kind of did or could have worked out is Trump's tariffs, but he has poor strategy. He can't plan anything. Again, it's just like he's good at campaigning and terrible at governing. I think he's only gotten like maybe 10 of his tariffs, if that, to even be signed into law. And then obviously the whole most transparent administration thing is a total joke. It's like they started with the JFK files. They give us all this information, but say, oh yeah, go look at it yourself. Go figure it out. Not anywhere closer to knowing who it was. I mean, I know exactly what it was. I know exactly what happened because I've done the due diligence and the research, but they don't care to tell us. Then the Epstein files, which is the Epstein scandal at this point, that Trump started himself in 2019, that's not going away. Just wait till this war settles, whenever that is. That is going to come right back up. And you could maybe even make the argument as to that's why we're in this war right now, is to be a distraction from Trump's abysmal Epstein scandal that's likely going to get a lot of his officials impeached. If not, they're going to just quit, or something bad's going to happen. I mean, Trump might even get impeached himself in the next year or so if the Republicans if we lose the midterms, which I think we are going to. I think it's very likely Republicans lose the midterms. Like I said, this is going to be a long episode. We're about to actually react to Tucker and Joe Kent's interview. This is the whole point of the episode. Sorry to rant a little bit, but I figured it's important to talk about the dichotomy of the situation here. You have people that are trying to tell you that this whole situation with Iran is going to destroy America, and it's like the most dangerous threat we've ever seen. That's not the truth. The truth is Iran is literally trying to survive. They don't want to be overthrown by this Israeli supremacy that's been dominating and overthrowing countries ever since their existence, and especially over the past 20 years with U.S. taxpayer support. So you really can't blame when it comes to that. Not saying these people are saints, but you really have to understand that that's the truth. And it's not what these MAGA shills are trying to tell you, because they are basically the new George Bush 2.0. I mean, I really call it Orange Bush. That's basically what it is if you get it with, Trump. But yeah, that's what these people are. Like, they have 100% sold out. And the people that are really telling the truth, the people that have stayed true to those values of America first and literally have not changed, like, have just been real as hell, like myself. Now we're being called Democrats. Now we're being called these black pillars, woke right, woke right. Like, there's just so many stupid names that makes no sense. When the real woke right are the people like James Lindsay, the guy that coined that term, who are putting a foreign country over America. And that's the thing. The thing that's really, before we get started, one last thing. What's so convoluted about this, and this is I cannot stand, is that these people are so intelligent about using subterfuge. They can literally make it to where this a false dichotomy about Israel and why we need to support them and how Iran's a threat. Like, they are literally able to form the argument to where you could get the average person to maybe understand, but it's so dishonest. It's completely disingenuous, and that's how they have to work. It is a propaganda operation to be able to get this war going, and that's what these people are doing. Like, they're agents of the Matrix of Israel. The Ben Fergusons, the Ted Cruzes, they are literally, they're vouching for this war, and they're knowingly lying about this because they want the state of Israel to flourish, and they don't even care about the United States. They're Israel first and America last. So that's my entire take on that. Before we get into the total reaction video here, which is going to be about 2 hours, and we're going to break it down as we go, but make sure to follow us on all platforms. Our show, The Kacee Allen Show, which you're watching right now, is primarily on YouTube. You can see our banner down below. Make sure to get us on all platforms and get into all of our communities, and check out our subscription page. But yeah, we're going to break this down here. Tucker Carlson and Joe Kent, just a couple days after he resigned as head of counterterrorism, when he was appointed by Trump. And again, Trump literally said that this guy, he's a good guy, but he's not good on security. Well, why do you appoint him then? And Trump's logic always falls apart. It's not Trump derangement syndrome. It's common sense, folks. But here we are. Here's Tucker Carlson, Joe Kent.
We want to start tonight with a clip from January of 2024. This is from this show, and this is Joe Kent, who later went on to become, until yesterday, the director of the National Counterterrorism Center. Here it is.
What do you think the immediate and then longer term effects of a war with Iran would be on the United States?
Immediately, it would be very bloody. I have no doubt that we could probably defeat some of their air defense and go in there and have another shock and awe campaign. But again, like we saw how the shock and awe campaign in Iraq really didn't actually work in the long run. So I have no doubt that we'd have some immediate results that people would cheer about here in the United States. But Iran, Persia, has always been an empire. It's been around longer than any of the other players in the modern Middle East right now, and they are not going anywhere. If we get deeply involved and deeply entangled with Iran, we are playing right into China's hands, because China would like nothing more than for us to be committing our military industrial base to a war in Eastern Europe, in Ukraine, and then to be committing our conventional military power, our blood and our treasure, back in the Middle East. That will make the Pacific, our actual border, extremely vulnerable to Chinese aggression. Or China will simply just watch us bleed out economically as we bleed out on the battlefield on these couple different theaters. It's absolute insanity. It's opening up Pandora's box. And again, for what gain to the American people?
So the very first thing you notice about that clip, which was shot almost exactly a year before the current president was inaugurated, is that it was right. It was prescient. He called it. He called the general outline. Not that it was hard to call, but Joe Kent knows what he's talking about. He spent a lot of his life in that region. And he said a year before this current presidency began, this is a big, serious country. It's the oldest civilization in the region. And if we went to war with Iran, there would be a momentary sugar high, Americans would support it because they support their own country and they certainly support their military, and people would approve of it. But very quickly, you could see a process by which we got caught there, trapped there, bear trap. Hard to extricate yourself from that. And sitting on the sidelines would be our chief global competitor, China, who would be silently nodding along with a slowly spreading grin, knowing that they were the main beneficiary of what they were seeing, of our waste of American lives and treasure, as Joe Kent said. So we haven't reached that stage, thankfully. We're moving toward it, and everyone who's watching carefully knows that. And if you're honest, you know that. So this is a very serious moment we're in, and we're watching not just a war in Iran, but potentially a total realignment of the world and the loss, in some sense, of what the United States has globally. This could be the beginning of the end of our influence in a lot of the world. And
yeah, I mean, no joke. Like, we really do underscore the multipolar situation with Russia and China and how it really affects all of us here. When you talk about the Strait of Hormuz, gas prices affecting everyone, 20% of the global supply. And then you have the possibility of, if Iran gets attacked, then you're kind of pushing maybe China, Russia, North Korea, their allies, to maybe form a World War III type situation against Europe, Israel, United States, God knows whoever else wants to fight, even if Europe does. But yeah, this could be not only like another forever war, as we talk about, like how, Afghanistan, Iraq, 20 plus years, this could be a world war, like something so detrimental that it just leaves us in a very precarious situation. And I think that's something we can't afford.
that's just the beginning. So again, that's a big deal. It's starting to dawn on people, and that leaves Joe Kent as one of the relatively few people connected to this administration who said it in public. Is that good or bad? Well, it may seem good. Of course, you want to be around people who have clarity about what's going to happen next. But in practical terms, it's bad. In fact, it's always bad. Whenever you have somebody who stands up and says, don't do this, here's what could happen, and then you do it anyway, and it turns out that person was right, your first instinct is not to apologize and correct your behavior. Your first instinct is to crush the person who called it correctly. And that's your instinct because, and it's the lowest of all instincts, but it's a human instinct. That's your instinct because his correct prediction is an indictment of you, of course. And it's a way to deflect attacks on you and your own culpability by blaming the guy who told you it was going to happen before you did it. And this is a long-standing fact of human life. And in the last 60 years in this country, it has been the iron law of foreign policy, which is to say, when things go wrong, the only people who get punished are the people who criticize the adventure in the first place. You can imagine General Westmoreland attacking Walter Cronkite of CBS News, whatever you think of Walter Cronkite, in my case, not much. But fundamentally, it was Walter Cronkite sitting very much on the sideline saying, hey, this war is not going well. And there was General Westmoreland prosecuting the war. But General Westmoreland argued till the end of his life, in some ways successfully, that he lost the war because Walter Cronkite criticized the war. Is that really true? How many troops did Walter Cronkite command? Was he in charge of strategy? Don't think so. He was a newsreader in New York. But you can see why Westmoreland did that, why a lot of people believed it, agreed with Westmoreland. You saw the same thing happen in the days after the tragic and incredibly stupid Afghan withdrawal under Joe Biden. That didn't help the United States. Of course, we had to get out of Afghanistan, but the way we did it, who would argue that was a good thing? It was a terrible thing and resulted in the deaths of a lot of Americans. So who was punished for that? As far as we can tell, and we've checked, only one person. And that would be Colonel Stu Scheller of the United States Marine Corps. What was his crime? Planning the withdrawal from Afghanistan? Oh, no. No, Stu Scheller's crime was saying out loud, boy, that didn't work very well, and why'd we do this? And for that, he went to jail. The people who actually did it, who gave the orders, or who carried them out without asking questions about them, which was everybody else, they're fine. You don't even know their names, and they certainly haven't been penalized. So there is a long history, because this is a standing feature of the way people are, that you criticize those who told the truth and who were right, who called it ahead of time. Now, in a functioning society, you get a hold of yourself and you understand that people are like this. But if you want to be successful as a society, you have to restrain that impulse because it's low and it's counterproductive. And if you silence people who tell the truth, you end up making the same mistakes again and again and again. And maybe that's why we're here at this pivotal point in our war with Iran. So that's the first thing you notice. Joe Kent was right. Therefore, Joe Kent must be destroyed. And there is, of course, this ongoing effort to do that, to dismiss Joe Kent as a tool of the Islamists or a leaker, or say he's married to someone who works for Hezbollah, or lie after lie after lie. But they're all aimed at Joe Kent, the man, at his motives, at his character, at his personality, at his wife. And that's by design, because none of them touch on his reason for resigning as director of the National Counterterrorism Center. Because if you focused on that, you would have to answer his questions. You'd have to answer, is this true? Is what Joe Kent, who possessed highest level intelligence clearances, who was really barred from knowing no secret in the U.S. government since he was one of our top intelligence officials until yesterday, seems like a pretty informed guy. Is what he's saying true? That's the last conversation anyone in Washington wants to have. So just attack him. And you're going to see a lot more of that. The people who said this war was a bad idea will be punished. And the more it turns out they were right, which is to say the worse this project goes, the more it becomes obviously counterproductive to American interests, the more vigorously they will be punished, unto and including jail. Stu Scheller went to jail. Probably not the only one who will going forward. So you should just know that and understand what you're seeing in those terms. The second thing that comes immediately to mind when you watch Joe Kent from January of 2024 talk about what would happen if we went to war with Iran is that what he said that day, a year before Donald Trump's inauguration, could have been said by Donald Trump, maybe with a different style. He was making Donald Trump's case. The case that Donald Trump has made for a very long time. Donald Trump, as everybody knows, became the Republican nominee in 2016, 10 years ago, in part because he was the only Republican running for president that year out of a field of nearly 20 people who was willing to say what everyone else knew but was afraid to say, which is the Iraq War didn't help us. It hurt us. It was a dumb idea, and it went on way too long, and it became the quagmire that people like Donald Trump predicted it would be. And the American public, so relieved to hear the truth about something they already knew, made him the Republican nominee despite maybe some concerns. But they did it because, hey, he was right, and he's the only one brave enough to say so. And Donald Trump made varieties of that case for the next 10 years, and in many cases specifically about Iran, because Trump has seen, long before most people in Washington, before almost anyone in Washington, the big picture, the outline, which is this is a contest between the United States in the West and China in the East, a rising power that matches or maybe exceeds our economic power globally, and we have to figure out how to apportion power. And we don't want to get sidetracked with engagements like, I don't know, another endless Middle Eastern war, because in the end, the only winner of that conflict is China. In this specific case. Whoever in the end settles this conflict, whether it's the United States or some other power, whoever comes in at whatever the end of it is and says, enough, this is hurting the world. Each side has made its point, but the global economy has a critical interest in the Persian Gulf.
I beg to differ on that one. I would say that Israel is going to benefit off of this one. It's not just China that's going to win. You could argue China could maybe they could gain from the U.S. struggle and the multipolar dominance in that kind of competition. But I mean, no, like that's going to help Israel. They're going to be the hegemonic dominance in the Middle East, and that's going to then maybe make them be a rival with China for sure. So yeah, it's not going to be just China. That's what he's kind of leaving out there. Israel is definitely going to, if they do end up, defeating Iran and accomplishing their goals, yeah, they're going to be the ones that do win from this.
That's energy. And we're going to stop this now. Whoever that person is will become more powerful than ever, and everyone else will become less powerful. The person who settles disputes is in charge. not the person who starts them, not the person who wins them, the person who stops them. When dad comes home and stops the fighting between brother and sister, who's in charge? Dad, because he stopped the conflict. All of which is to say, if at the end of this conflict, it's China that comes in, China, which has a vested interest in what happens in the region since they're a major consumer of Gulf energy, if it's China that comes in and restores the energy flows out of the Persian Gulf and restores some version of peace, gets the fighting to stop, then China is in charge of the Persian Gulf. That's just a fact of nature. And so a lot is at stake, as Joe Kent knew, as Donald Trump knew. And so the question is, how did Donald Trump, after 10 years of saying one thing, do in the pivotal act of his presidency exactly the opposite? That's not just an academic question. It's not the beginning of a conspiracy theory about some shadowy lobby. It's the most important question we face, because this is not the first time the United States has entered into this kind of war against the wishes of its own population and in clear contravention of its own interests, against its interests. This isn't good for us. No one has made the case that it's good for us. And increasingly, as the days pass, it becomes obvious to everyone why it's not good for us. And if you don't believe that, then check the prices of food and fuel and everything you buy, because everything you buy is dependent on the price of energy and the production of fertilizer, both of which are affected almost immediately by the closure of the Straits of Hormuz. So we did this again. It's not exactly clear how or why we did this, but we need to find out. And there is great resistance to finding out. And you've noticed that in the last 36 hours since Joe Kent resigned as director of the National Counterterrorism Center, one of our top intel officials, because the attacks on him have prevented an honest conversation about what he's actually saying. And what he's saying is, and he says it clearly, and we're going to ask him about it directly in just a moment, Israel got us into this war.
Yep.
Its
Exactly.
lobby in the United States pressured the president, and its prime minister in Israel told the president, we're going without you. Join us, because if you don't, your troops in the region, your interests in the region, your citizens in the region will all be at risk. You have no choice. They led the way. That's Joe Kent's position. And rather than push back against that and say, no, actually, he's wrong, they're telling you to shut up. And why are they doing that? Well, there's only one reason people ever become hysterical and slanderous, start screaming at you rather than answering you. It's because they're lying. And the truth is, this is not the first time you've watched people in charge lie. This has been going on a long time. And lies give way to a whole bunch of bad things. More lies. Once you tell a lie, you bolster it with further lying. Hysteria, the fear of being caught.
I mean, yeah, Clinton, Bush, Obama, Trump, Biden. Yeah. All of them have engaged in a foreign war in some way in their own way to just destroy America. Like, they're all equally responsible in some form.
Lying, the rage and slander. If the person catches me lying, he wins in the zero-sum game of lying. I die. You go in the attack to cover your lies. And bad judgment. You can't make wise decisions on the basis of lies because they're not true. They're not based in reality. That didn't actually happen. Or in this case, it did happen, but you're pretending it didn't. So a country based on lies, like a family based on lies, like an individual life based on lies, cannot succeed. In fact, it's hellish, as all of us have experienced in our lying. And so the only way out of this is to stop lying, is to tell the truth now, probably 63 years after we should have started telling the truth.
Or you're going to see what's happening today is no one trusts the government, and people are trusting, podcasters and Twitter influencers. And the people that were once credible in the establishment are basically losing their credibility big time. And that's why they're desperate. And that's why we're going to see the political landscape really change in the next, let's just see in this midterm cycle and maybe the next primary election. I'm sorry, general election. You know, people are waking up and you're going to see a big change. I'm telling you.
But it's never too late to tell the truth now about everything, because it's never as painful as you think it will be. It's actually an act of liberation. In fact, it's the only real act of liberation. Telling the truth sets you free because the truth itself sets you free. That is always and everywhere a fact. And the longer you delay doing that, the more horrible the consequences of your lies. So let's hope that tonight, with this conversation with Joe Kent, is the beginning of the long overdue truth-telling, which is the only thing that will save this country. And one final note about Joe Kent, who I spent the last 24 hours with. Joe Kent's resume hardly needs explanation because everyone is aware this is a man who deployed on 11 combat missions to the global war on terror. This is sort of the perfect representation of the GWAT generation. This is one of those guys we often celebrate, but too rarely hear from, who we sent out to fight the so-called war on terror that began on 9/11. And it's an entire generation of men who look and sound, for the most part, very much like Joe Kent. So the implication, of course, he doesn't care about security or he's soft on Iran. Joe Kent spent, well, the majority of his 20s and 30s.
Yeah, again, that's like the dumbest thing I've heard Trump say. It's like, dude, do you think before you talk? If he was soft on security, if he was a guy that wasn't good for that position, then why did you appoint him as head of counterterrorism? Are you kidding me? I mean, that's ridiculous. But anyways.
Fighting Iranian proxies and watching his friends get killed by them. So this is someone who's actually earned the right to speak about Iran and the war on terror. And of course, he was the director of the National Counterterrorism Center. So he's thought a lot about terrorism in this country and the blowback from events like this. And we're going to ask him about that as well. But the other thing to notice about Joe Kent, and it may be his defining factor, is that he doesn't slander anyone. His resignation letter was not an attack on Donald Trump. It wasn't a promise to write a tell-all memoir about what he saw on the inside or to aggrandize himself or to get a job on a TV show or sell something. I asked him at dinner last night, what are your plans? None. He did this purely because he believes, as he'll explain in a second, this is the only way to save the United States from certain disaster. Tell the truth. Air the secrets. Be honest for once in decades about what is actually happening, things that everybody who lives here suspects are happening. In some cases, we're probably wrong. We've come to the wrong conclusions. That's okay. Tell us what actually happened. Tell us why you did this. And let's reorient this country where it should be, which is around its own citizens. Make the decisions that you make based on one criterion. Is this good for my people or not? In the way that a father would lead his family or an officer would lead his troops. It's not complicated. Everybody wants that. That's not a partisan question. That's a human question. And that's the question Joe Kent is posing. Why can't we do this? Why can't we say this? It's not attacking anybody. Joe Kent himself does not attack anybody. But this is a last-ditch attempt, not simply to save the country from disaster in Iran, but to save the country, period. And as you listen to him speak, ask yourself, is this a man who's working for Hezbollah or is an egomaniac or a leaker? Or is this a man who says very little when he has nothing to say, who speaks straightforwardly and with honesty, self-evident honesty? Is this a man of dignity and decency? Is this a man that America once had a lot of? Is this a man who was once, in effect, the American archetype, the guy you looked up to, the guy you wanted your son to be? Whether you agree with him or not, maybe you're reaching completely different conclusions.
Yeah, it's hard to say, like, physiognomy, if I can even say that word right, physiognomy never lies. I mean, look at someone like Lindsey Graham and Mark Levin who support the war with Iran, but then you have someone like Joe Kent who, again, he's in shape, good-looking guy, no homo, but, I mean, come on, you're trying to say that you're going to support the fat slobs like Lindsey Graham? And you're going to say that this Joe Kent guy is not someone you'd want to look up to and not someone you'd want to actually respect more. I mean, come on, it's a joke. It's what they've convinced these, the MAGA sycophants to think, and it's pretty sad.
But as you listen to him speak, ask yourself, is this the kind of person who makes me proud to be a fellow American? Because it's really a referendum on us. If we can't see that Joe Kent, whatever you think of his opinions, is the kind of man this country should be producing and should be elevating and should be proud of, if we can't see that, then we've failed the test and we've lost. But judge for yourself. Here's Joe Kent. Joe, thanks a lot for joining us. So I appreciate this. So I want to go through the letter that you sent yesterday as you resigned as director of the National Counterterrorism Center, and basically through the big points and give you a chance to explain them. You've been spoken for quite a bit over the last 24 hours, so I think it'd be really helpful to all of us if you would speak for yourself and flesh out some of these points. I'm just going to read the first one. I cannot in good conscience support the ongoing war in Iran. Iran posed no imminent threat to our nation.
Based.
Iran posed no imminent threat to our nation. How did you reach that conclusion?
I think this is key. I mean, this would be more challenging to explain had the Secretary of State, the President, and the Speaker of the House not come out and said that we conducted this attack at this time because the Israelis were about to do so. So that takes away the argument that there was an imminent threat, as in Iran was planning to attack us immediately. That just simply did not exist.
May I ask you to pause? Sure. And so I've heard people say that, and this just happened, but history has a way of getting rewritten in real time. And then you look back 10 or 15, 20, 25 years later, and no one seems to understand the things that you saw because they've been eliminated. Yeah. So I think it's important to stop and say, here's what we actually know. So I'd like now, if we could, just to play one of the statements that you alluded to, and that's from Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State. And this was shortly after this war commenced. And he was explaining as is his habit, in a thoughtful, precise way, why. Here's Secretary of State Marco Rubio.
And so the president made the very wise decision. We knew that there was going to be an Israeli action. We knew that that would precipitate an attack against American forces. And we knew that if we didn't preemptively go after them before they launched those attacks, we would suffer higher casualties and perhaps even higher those killed. And then we would all be here answering questions about why we knew that and didn't act.
Well.
Okay, so that is his almost contemporaneous explanation, and it's not offhand. He reasons it out. He explains there's a logic chain there, and he says, we knew not that Iran was going to attack. He did not say that.
Right.
He said we knew that Israel was going to attack Iran, and in retaliation for those attacks by Israel against Iran, Iran might attack American forces. So the imminent threat that the Secretary of State is describing is not from Iran, it's from Israel.
Exactly. And I think this speaks to the broader issue. Who is in charge of our policy in the Middle East? Who is in charge of when we decide to go to war or not? In this case, with what the Secretary described, and later on the President, later on the Speaker of the House, and the way the events played out, the Israelis drove the decision to take this action, which we knew would set off a series of events, meaning the Iranians would retaliate. Now, I think there's a potential there where we could have done several different things. We could have simply said to the Israelis, no, you will not. And if you do, then we will take something away from you. I think that it's fine that we offer defense to Israel, but when we're providing the means for their defense, we get to dictate the terms of when they go on the offensive. Otherwise, they stand to lose that relationship. And the Israelis felt emboldened that no matter what they did, no matter what situation they put us in, that they could go ahead and take this action, and we would just have to react. And so that speaks to that relationship. But also, it just shows that there was a lobby pushing for us to go to war. I know we'll get into that later on in the statement, but we had a real potential, I think, knowing what we know of the Iranians and how they react, and in particular, how they react to President Trump's leadership. The Iranians under President Trump's leadership, especially in his second term, they have shown that they take a very calculated approach to the escalation ladder. For instance, in the lead up to the 12-day war before Midnight Hammer, the Iranians didn't attack us. They were engaged in negotiations with us. When President Trump came back into office, they stopped their proxies who were attacking us under the Biden administration because they knew Biden was weak. They stopped their proxies from attacking us as well. So they knew President Trump was someone who wanted to negotiate, but more importantly, they knew that President Trump was not someone to mess with because he killed Qasem Soleimani. He killed Abu Mahdi Mohandas. He had defeated ISIS. They knew that President Trump was a man of action. He is militarily strong. And so they said, before we take an action, we need to make sure that it's calculated. So I think in this scenario, even if the Israelis told us we're going to strike on this date at this time, and we didn't, try to negotiate with the Israelis and say, hey, we'll take something away from them, I think we still could have back-channeled to the Iranians and said, hey, if something happens here in the next couple of days, it's not us. We're still serious about negotiations, and we don't want to escalate this because it's well known what the Iranians' plans were. We knew that they were going to hit potentially our bases in the region, potentially our allies. We knew about the Straits of Hormuz. All of these things, I think, were fairly well known.
And the Houthis' ability to close the Red Sea, which they've not yet done, but which would be catastrophic to the world. Everybody knows somebody who has had an unexpected tragedy. You lose a parent, a spouse, and that person, to compound the tragedy, didn't have life
intent, what your enemy is capable of doing and what they actually want to do. And again, back to the data that we have on the Iranians, they used the escalation ladder. We saw that deliberately during the 12-day war. When they struck back after Midnight Hammer, it was very deliberate. They fired an equal amount of missiles as we dropped bombs on the nuclear facilities, and they basically hit a part of a base in Qatar that they knew we didn't have any troops on.
Yes.
They didn't want to escalate any further than we were willing to go. But also the Iranians, when they pose a threat to us, they usually do it with their proxies. And if their proxies stick their heads up and their proxies come after us, this is basically the Trump doctrine. We hammer them and we hammer their high profile leaders. Qasem Soleimani was highly effective and highly revered in Iran because the previous presidents prior to President Trump, Obama and Bush, let Qasem Soleimani run around, raise proxy armies, kill Americans, and no one ever did anything to him. President Trump rightfully killed Qasem Soleimani. We got his deputy, Abu Mahdi Mohandas, who had American blood in his hands, took them off the battlefield. But then President Trump stopped. He took those two key players off the battlefield, and he said, I'm not going to further escalate with Iran unless you escalate with us, knowing that if we struck Iran and we truly struck the regime, that would only strengthen the regime. So then President Trump did something that's incredibly smart, used that decisive military action, but then he coupled it with an economic package of sanctions, maximum pressure sanctions. And we can debate whether or not we should be using sanctions as the prime reserve currency holder or whatever, but he pressured the Iranians economically after punching them in the mouth and showing that, hey, I won't take this. I'm not Obama. I'm not Bush. If you cross a line, I will come after you. But then he really put the pressure on them economically. And if you look at the effect of the economic sanctions, that's what got the Iranian people on the streets actually protesting against the Ayatollah's government, which is ostensibly what we would like. We would like to see a bottom-up regime change where we get rid of the Ayatollah, but it's the will of the people, and they have a new successful government that's stable that we can deal with. The one way to throw that all out the window, and this isn't just Joe Kent's opinion, many scholars, and I think a lot of intelligence assessments have been written about this too, I know for a fact they have, is that if we struck the regime, it would only strengthen it. And that's not, I think that's just basic common sense. I mean, I think of myself, and probably you're in this camp as well. We didn't like Joe Biden. We didn't like Barack Obama. But if an outside force were to come in here and try and topple them while they were the president, I would 100% rally around the flag. That's just common sense. So if we wanted to strengthen,
you actually did. You
right.
joined the military under Bill Clinton,
under Clinton,
whom I assume you didn't vote for.
Right.
Right. You joined in 1998. You've gone the whole cycle of the war on terror, I notice. And served out as an NCO, I think your entire
NCO and warrant officer.
Yeah, warrant officer, 20 years. And I should just say, I hate ever to refer to a man's resume as like a data point because your ideas exist separately. But in this specific case, meaning you spent most of your time fighting Iranian proxies.
Yeah, a good deal of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're aware of the threat from Iran. You have personally used violence against that threat.
I have.
Yep. A lot of it, I think. And you supported the president's policy up until fairly recently.
Right.
And you've said that a lot in public. In fact, you went to work for him. He hired you.
Yeah.
Right. But here's from what I can tell, is the central question: imminent threat. Now, the president has said many times to many people, including the public, Iran can't have a nuclear weapon.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure he must have said that to you. You don't have to say it, but he said it to everybody. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. They can't have a nuke. Whenever asked, we say, let's just start here. They can't have a nuke.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, got it. Everyone agreed with that conceptually. Was Iran on the verge of getting a nuclear weapon?
No, they weren't, 3 weeks ago when this started, and they weren't in June either. I mean, the Iranians have had a religious ruling, a fatwa, against actually developing a nuclear weapon since 2000.
Yeah, that's why Tulsi Gabbard literally said the other day in that congressional hearing, or whatever testimony it was, she could not determine that her original assessment that Iran wasn't building nuclear weapons, like Kent just said. She literally couldn't say that because it would contradict what Trump said that was the exact opposite of that. So it's really telling it tells you that, look, they were trying to get us under the pretense that Iran has nuclear weapons. They're going to be just like Iraq, like the same propaganda, same playbook. And it's good that someone like Ken is willing to call this out, because I'm sure everyone realizes it too. On the inside, they're just playing along, and maybe they agree with it, or maybe they know they're doing the wrong thing, and they want to keep their job.
2004. That's been in place since 2004. That's available in the public sphere. But then also we had no intelligence to indicate that fatwa was being disobeyed or it was on the cusp of being lifted. The Iranian strategy, it's actually pretty pragmatic. The Iranians are obviously aware of what's taking place in their region, and their strategy was to not completely abandon their nuclear program, because they saw what happened to Muammar Gaddafi in Libya. When he said, hey, I've got no more nukes, I'll do what you say. I'll give up my nukes.
And we gave him the Nobel Peace Prize?
Yeah, we regime changed him, and he was executed by his own people in the most horrific way.
Sodomized by a bayonet. Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's the lesson, I think, that the entire region took from that when Hillary Clinton.
Unfortunately, that is what the neocon, neoliberal warmongers, that's the lesson that they showed everyone in the region. And then conversely, the Iranians also knew that if they came out and said, okay, we've got a nuke, whether they were bluffing or not, Saddam Hussein, Iraq right next door. So they kind of had
he hung, I think.
He was hung by his own people, after a bloody, war that's still essentially going on inside of Iraq. So the Iranians' position, when viewed from the lens of the region, was actually fairly pragmatic. They were preventing, themselves from developing a bomb, but they still wanted the ability. They wanted the ability to enrich. They wanted the ability to have some components so that they weren't completely stripped of it. And when we always assessed that they were either several months or a year, 2 years away from actually being able to develop a nuclear weapon. And that's not because the Iranians are stupid people. I think we can tell right now that the Iranians are anything but stupid. They had the ability, I think, that the brain power to actually develop one, or they could have simply traded a ton of oil with Pakistan or with someone else to actually get a nuclear weapon. They were not doing that. We had no intelligence to indicate that they were.
Then why was the president, was he told that they were on the brink of it? Why at the beginning of every conversation about Iran would the president say, I don't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon? Why was that the central question when, and you would know since you were the director of the National Counter?
Well, that's easy. It's because they did not want they did not want Israel to have a deterrent to, they did not want to have Iran to have a deterrent to Israel, because they would be untouchable, just like North Korea. That's why we can't do anything with North Korea, and we definitely don't intend to. Yeah, they've got one nuke and it's not that good. Probably isn't very effective. I mean, it could be. But just because they've secured a program, it essentially makes them untouchable. And it's the same false dichotomy where they say, well, Iran's getting nuclear weapons because they want to destroy America. No, it's they want protection from someone else who wants to destroy them. It's the same thing every time. But they try to make it seem like it's just, oh no, these are just evil terrorists. They want to
terrorism center.
Destroy everything.
Why would he say that if there was no intelligence or evidence that they were actually developing a nuke?
So a couple things. This is what I talk about in the letter about this ecosystem of information that's laundered through a lot of prominent neoconservative types that are very sympathetic to the Israeli cause, and then also Israeli government officials who give us things in semi-official channels. What they did was they created basically a shifting red line or a new red line. So that if the president's red line was Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon, we've actually got a lot of trade space in there for a deal to be made because of what I just described with the Iranian policy. Essentially, the Iranians saying, okay, well, we don't want a nuclear weapon. Well, that means we basically are at a point where we can start negotiating and we can come up with a deal. And the president is a fantastic deal maker. So if your goal is to move us away from any kind of deal and your goal is to move us into a conflict, you have to shift that red line. And that's where a lot of this, I would say, what became a de facto U.S. policy of Iran can have no nuclear enrichment. It was laundered through a lot of the different talking heads, Mark Levin, Mark Dubowitz. You've got the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, you name it. Washington, D.C. has plenty of pro-Israel.
Mark Levin, a week before the first strikes in Operation Midnight Hammer last summer, he had lunch with Trump and some other guy and lobbied on behalf of Israel to make this happen. Trump literally took that clown's advice. It's insane. Like the ultimate betrayal of the base.
Israeli lobbyists who will come and say those things, who will publish think pieces on it, who will go on the media, who will run, op-eds in the Wall Street Journal to talk about this, why they can't have any enrichment whatsoever. And then we have a high degree of engagement with Israeli government officials who will come in and say, well, they're enriching and they could enrich or they could enrich more, and that will get them closer to a nuclear weapon. So then enrichment basically became the new U.S. policy. And the only official I've heard, and folks are welcome to look for this, that said this in the first Trump administration was Mike Pompeo. He said it. The president didn't say it. The president has been very consistent. He said they can't have a nuclear weapon. But again, like I said, that puts us at a place where we actually could have negotiations. And only President Trump, I think, could successfully have negotiations with Iran because he actually punched them in the face. And the Iranians had been walking all over us. They had been killing our soldiers. All of that is true whatsoever for the Iranians, what their proxies were doing. President Trump level set that when he killed Qasem Soleimani and he killed Abu Mahdi Mohandas. The folks who wanted to push an actual regime change war in Iran knew this, and they knew there was a potential to get a deal, or there was a potential for President Trump just to continue the policy of maximum pressure sanctions. And if you come after us, we will hit you hard. And that got the protesters out on the street in Iran. And that's actually what the regime feared the most. I don't think the Ayatollah feared dying, not because he, is some crazy lunatic. I'm sure some degree of the Shia martyrdom culture played a factor in that. However, I think he knew that if he was killed, the regime would survive because the people would rally around the regime.
Well, there's been a lot of noise in the news lately, but none of it matters if you can't hear it. And there's no shame in that. It happens to millions of people every year.
A lot of them speak English. They culturally feel the same. But the Israelis have a much different tolerance for how and why they're going to war and for their endurance for war. The Israelis are completely fine with Iran slipping into chaos. That means that the Ayatollah and the IRGC can't really threaten them anymore. Hezbollah's money might be cut off in their head. And so complete chaos in Iran, it's not necessarily a bad thing for the Israelis. For us, for global energy, Straits of Hormuz, our partners in the GCC, mass migration problems in Europe, this is a major problem.
It's a catastrophe for the world.
For the world, yeah.
Hate to brag, but we're pretty confident this show is the most vehemently pro-dog podcast you're ever going to see. We can take or leave some people, but dogs are non-negotiable. I can't name anybody, but by Advocates for Israel, it's a PR department here in the United States, which is huge. And you said they couldn't do any of this without us. You often hear its promoters, its lobbyists say, Israel just wants to fight its own wars. Back off and let us do it. Is that not?
I'd love us to run the experiment. We try that.
What would happen?
The Israelis, again, they have the ability to go out and collect great intelligence. They have a very capable military, but they're a very small country. I think Israel would be able to defend itself. I think it could conduct, limited strikes on its borders. I think it could continue carrying out pretty impressive targeted assassinations against its adversaries. And so I think you would see it relatively contained. What it couldn't do is go topple entire governments. It couldn't do something like the Iran war, the Iraq war. It couldn't aggressively, destabilize Syria. These big, heavy lifts of regime change that America has been engaged in, Israel could not do on their own, which is where you get back to the Israeli lobby being just so potent and so powerful and so aggressive.
So that, and I want to ask you about that because that's the line that you're being attacked for. And so I want to go through and have you explain more fully, if you would, why you said what you did and read it. But before I do that, one last question. Was any of this debated that you know of before this war commenced 3 weeks ago? Did anyone say, well, wait a second, if we do this and kill the Ayatollah, because that was like the first order, I think, what are the effects after? And like, what's the goal? Did these debates ever
I know
emerge?
They happened heavily before the 12-day war. I think that when the Israelis came back around and said they wanted to do this, I just don't think there was any debate. I think just based on the ecosystem and the amount of influence that was exerted.
Because in some ways, this is a little humiliating since we were told, I was told, the whole country was told that after the 12-day war, there was no Iranian nuclear threat. We got rid of it. I'm not imagining that. It just happened last summer.
Yeah.
Do you recall those statements?
Yeah. I mean, Operation Midnight Hammer.
Yes.
Destroyed their nuclear capability. So
how was it that we wound up 6 months later getting another lecture about their nuclear capability and its imminent threat to the United States and nuclear tipped ballistic missiles aimed at Miami and the whole thing? And nobody, first of all, there was no organized protest against this. Like in a normal country, you'd think people would rise up and be like, whoa, 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 whoa.
Mhm.
You just told us 6 months ago the exact opposite. What did internally in the intel world people say, what the hell is going on?
I just think that the planning for this was so compartmentalized that there was no debate, as in it was a foregone conclusion. Maybe the exact timing they weren't exactly aware of, or that had to be debated. When do we do it? But it seemed to be a foregone conclusion. And I'm sure others will say, no, that's not the case at all. But there was no robust debate like there was going into the 12-day war. Because the big question that a lot of us had that were skeptical of Operation Midnight Hammer was, okay, so we do this. We know the Israelis' whole goal is regime change. What makes us think they'll stop? And if they do stop for a period of time, why won't we just be back in the same place in 6 months where they're saying that we have to go back in? And that's essentially exactly what happened.
So this was raised.
This was raised, to my knowledge, in June. This was like, hey, what happens next? So you take out the nuclear, the ability for them to enrich and to potentially develop a nuclear weapon. That's done. We know the Israelis have a completely different goal. Part of that strike, Midnight Hammer, was also to get the Israelis to wrap up the 12-day war. But we knew, because of what the Israelis told us, that they wanted, this is the time to take down the regime. And they don't want the Ayatollah to be in power. They want a regime change. They want a new government there. So we said, okay, knowing that, we know that this strike, this limited strike that we're going to do, isn't going to be enough. At some point, the Israelis are going to come back to us and say, hey, we have to go again. And with that knowledge, and I think because so many of us had pointed that out, and because the Israelis had said it, there wasn't a big debate this last time. You know, I think they had that discussion, you know, behind closed doors, and there wasn't a chance for any dissenting voices to come in.
But you would think, well, I've seen it before, you know, when a question like this arises, the people making the decision go immediately to their own intel agencies, and in your case, the agency that has jurisdiction over those agencies, and say, all available intel on the question of the Iranian nuclear program, all available intel on the question of ICBMs or its ballistic missile program, all available intel on what might happen if we topple the regime in place. Like, this has all been gamed out for a long time. There's a constant process of gathering intel on it, correct?
Yeah. And that's what we did in the lead up to the 12-day war.
But this time, no.
But this time, no, not to my knowledge. And I'm sure the administration will come out and say, no, you just weren't invited. But I've got a pretty good idea of how those meetings look. And even if I wasn't invited, I at least would have known that they took place. Again, it just seemed to be a foregone conclusion that like this was happening.
So most people don't wake up in the morning and decide to feel horrible, exhausted, foggy, disconnected from themselves. But it does happen, and it happens slowly. You're working hard. You're
from the inside to try and find, off ramps to try and provide information to see what I could do from the inside. But watching the casualties roll in, and I don't want to use anyone's, loss as a political talking point. But for me personally, watching more casualties come in, I just couldn't stand by as both a veteran and then, as a Gold Star husband and say like, I'm just going to continue to soldier on in this. It's time to try something different. I know this path that we're on it doesn't work. I've seen enough data. It's time to do something different.
How hard a decision was it?
It became really clear to me, over the weekend, this past weekend, that our message just wasn't getting through. And I was like, I know what happens if I stay. If I stay and I go along with this, I'm going to be, knee deep in it, trying to just chip away and make a difference. But my ability to have, my voice heard, to present data that runs contrary to the trajectory and the agenda that the administration's on, that's going to be squashed before it even really reaches the White House. And so I knew I had kind of hit my limit of effectiveness in that capacity. So really, it should have been a hard decision, but for me, it was crystal clear. It was like, number one, I can't be a part of this in good conscience, and I need to do everything I can to actually speak out about it, and speak out in a way that I hope resonates with the president and with some of my former colleagues. I understand they might be mad at me. They're getting hard questions from the media, but I really want them, as we descend even further into this war, I really hope that they take the time to reflect and to realize that we still have time to get us out of this. And then also for the 77 million people who voted for President Trump, who voted for no new wars, who voted for the foreign policy that President Trump enacted in his first administration, the foreign policy that I described. I mean, President Trump's first foreign policy, the one that he ran on, the one that he destroyed the Republican neocon establishment on, was incredibly pragmatic. We're not saying, you have to be some kind of a pacifist. We are saying, though, that you have to be very, very deliberate and judicious in how you use force. And you also have to use the full scope of the American toolbox. You use diplomacy, you use our economic leverage. And again, this isn't something that I came up with. President Trump came up with this. President Trump enacted this. And this is why 77 million people voted for him. It's probably not the only reason. But the no new wars, put America first, don't let us bleed out in the Middle East. That's what people voted for. And that's what I think you campaigned for. And I think that's something he could get us back to if he just takes a look and assesses how we got to where we are right now.
I want to get to that in a minute. Your solution, and I just want to be transparent about my motives. Not in this to attack anybody.
Right.
I'm concerned to the point of agitation about where this is going and its effects on the United States. I hope I'm wrong, but I believe it. And I think you do too. Yeah. I think this is the most serious thing that's happened in my lifetime. So I want to fix it and I don't want it to happen again.
Exactly.
And I don't want history to be written in real time by liars in such a way that no one understands what we're going through. And then we make the same mistakes. And this is a principle that any parent applies to his own children. No, say out loud what you did, and you're less likely to do it again. So, but before I say that, I just want to pause just on your personal experience. And I know you hate talking about this. I'm not going to make you uncomfortable by pushing too much, but you feel it. I feel it as an observer, such sadness for the men who've been used, including you. And I wonder how, given everything you've done and everything you've just said, how you don't feel bitter at the response that you've gotten from some people. How do you keep the bitterness out?
I think faith. I've got a great wife. God's blessed me twice with my late wife Shannon, my wife Heather,
Yes.
our two boys, Colt and Josh, who I think are watching this, hopefully. So faith and staying grounded on what's important.
Yes.
But then also, look, the people who are coming after me, I believe that the internet is like 25% real. I think there's a lot of bots. There's a lot of people who got delivered a talking point and they're going to get a paycheck for it.
I've noticed.
Or they just, they want the adoration. So I just don't take most of it seriously. And again, look, I know there's some of my former colleagues, people who I do like, who have had to come after me. And I understand that too. Like, I get it. Like, they're still there. They've got to discredit everything I'm saying right now. They're watching, taking notes. So I'm not bitter about that. I literally just want to focus on the task at hand. And the task at hand is stopping us from getting deeper into this quagmire. Because again, like just looking back on my experiences in Iraq, I don't feel like this happened. There wasn't the ability to. There wasn't this platform. There wasn't, the free independent media that existed in a real way that could reach people.
That's right.
And so to me, we have this opportunity. So I'll be bitter and angry later when, I read Twitter and somebody who I used to like says that Joe Kent's a traitor and we're going to fire him tomorrow anyways. We don't have time for that. Like, as you pointed out, major things are happening right now in this war, and the president is facing some very, very challenging decisions. So I personally just hope that he and his closest advisors listen and think, and that's the main priority.
So I strongly agree, and we can't allow hatred of us to inspire hatred in ourselves. You can't become a hater; it'll destroy you. It's what they want. So I salute you for avoiding that, and it's absolutely real. I spent a lot of time with you, and you're not a hater at all. You don't even seem that bothered. So that's incredible, given where you are. It's amazing. It's an act of faith, and I love it. End of the history portion of the segment, but I just think it's important to establish why you said first the war in Iraq, second the conflict in Syria, which took the life of your wife. Why both of those were driven by Israel?
Well, the war in Syria never would have happened without the war in Iraq. I mean, so had we not gone in and invaded Iraq, we wouldn't have had the conflict in Syria. But Syria was always a major problem under Assad for the Israelis, both under his father and under the Bashar al-Assad, Hafez al-Bashir, because of their support, the relationship with the Iranians, their support for Hezbollah.
Right.
Makes sense.
Yep.
And so they wanted to get rid of Assad as well. They saw Iraq as a vehicle for not just taking down Saddam Hussein, who posed a threat to them as well, but also as a way, a lily pad, if you will, to get rid of Syria. And basically,
so Assad must go, which was a slogan that all of a sudden emerged out of nowhere.
Right.
That was not like an organic American desire. It wasn't like Americans woke up and were like, the problem really is this ophthalmologist from Syria. He must go. It was that reflected the priorities of Israel, not of
Israel. And then I
States.
think you had the echo chamber as well, because you had all the usual suspects. You had FDD and you had all these different other organizations that were out there saying that, like, now's the time to,
Barry Weiss,
break off
true
the shackles.
Expert on Syria.
The next thing you know, like, there'll be a Syrian Thomas Jefferson that'll take over. And instead we got the former leader of Al-Qaeda. But a big reason that Syria became next after Iraq. In Iraq, we screwed the whole thing up so badly that we toppled Saddam, destabilized, fought a bitter insurgency. The Sunnis eventually aligned with Al-Qaeda, but then we beat them down so heavily because the Shias are the majority of the country. The Shias took over. Shias largely, the Shias that we installed in Iraq, the Dawa Party, Badr, Skiri, et cetera, heavily aligned with Iran. And so at the end of the Iraq war under Obama, there was this whole like, oh crap, we just handed basically the keys to Baghdad to the Iranians, who, again, hostile to us. Qasem Soleimani is running all over the place, funding proxies. It's a great deal. It helps Iran circumvent sanctions, their relationship with Iraq. And we just spent trillions, lost nearly 5,000 Americans there. And now we have this Shia superstate. And so then there was a ton of pressure coming from not just the Israelis, but I think also a lot of the Gulf to say, hey, we've got to get rid of Assad as well, because now you have this Iranian land bridge that goes basically from Damascus all the way to Tehran, and then you can hook that down into the Lebanese area where Hezbollah is.
Southern Lebanon.
So next thing you know, well, if you want to get rid of the guy Assad, who's an Alawite, well, you got a country full of like really angry Sunnis. And what are those guys going to turn into? And so next thing you know, we're now on the side of ISIS and Al-Qaeda. ISIS gets out of control, and we have to deploy back to Iraq, back to Syria, to put out essentially the brush fire that we created. And so that's why I put all of those together. Because again, without Israel's influence, would all of this have happened? Would the Iraq war have happened? Maybe, but they heavily lobbied for it. I mean, Benjamin Netanyahu, you can pull up tapes on YouTube. Like the guy was lobbying heavily back in 2002 for us to do regime change in Iraq. And he has stayed in power ever since. Ariel Sharon, who initially was the PM in the lead up to the Iraq war, initially was against it because he wanted us to focus on Iran. But then towards the end, he got on board as well. But the Likud party that's in power and has been driving Israeli politics now for most of my adult life, they were heavily in favor of the regime change war in Iraq, which again led to Shia domination led to the rise of ISIS, led to the rise of Al-Qaeda, and then heavily fueled the Syrian civil war. So again, this country, Israel, who they can be a good partner in some regards. I'm not anti-Israeli. I've worked with the Israelis. Again, very competent intelligence service, very wonderful people, but they have different objectives than we do. So to put them in the driver's seat of our foreign policy and to let them dictate our foreign policy is a disservice to the American people.
Which is what's happening.
Well, I think, and I think you're understating the effect. Disservice suggests like an inconvenience.
It's dangerous. Yeah.
Now we're looking at bankruptcy and death and collapse of the dollar and lots. And I'm not blaming Israel. By the way, I'm not blaming Israel for any of it. I'm blaming supine American leadership that takes this. I don't understand it at all.
They both have blame.
And that kind of leads to the most uncomfortable question of all. And I don't know if you can answer it. I don't think I can answer it. But since all of these dynamics are very well known to everyone in Washington, everyone who pretends this is not real, the Tom Cottons of the world, Lindsey Grahams or whatever, the liars, everybody knows. Everybody knows. Pro-Israel people know, anti-Israel people know that what you're saying is true. I don't think there's any debate about any of it. So since it was clear that we were being pushed by the Netanyahu government into this war, that they were choosing the timing, they chose the timing, right? I mean,
yeah, I'll take Marco Rubio's word for it.
I'll take Marco Rubio's word for it. Was it ever discussed the option that you mentioned at the beginning? Like, how about no?
Not that I know of.
Okay, so then you have to ask, I'm just following the logic train here. What kind of pressure does it require to get a president who campaigned against exactly this thing for 10 years to do exactly this thing? What does it take to do that?
I wish I knew definitively. I think there's two potentials or two schools of thought. I mean, one is the media echo chamber, the donors, the way the Israelis come in and kind of launder the information like I described previously. And then the other option is much darker. I mean, we still don't know what happened in Butler. We don't know what happened with Charlie Kirk. And by no means am I saying the Israelis did this or any of that, but I'm saying there's a lot of unanswered questions there. And there is enough data to at least say that there's a good chance that President Trump feels like he is under threat. We're not allowed to ask, basically, was there any linkage between what took place with Asif Merchant, who was recruited by the Iranians to come to America to recruit proxies to kill President Trump. The FBI put a confidential human source at him. All this is public now. This is all out there in the open. And he's arrested. And then 2 days later, a sniper takes a shot at President Trump. We think Merchant and we know the CHS was talking about the human source that the FBI put at Merchant. They were talking about, hey, we could kill the president potentially with a sniper rifle. But then they arrest him. 2 days later, Butler happens. And Crooks, according to the official narrative anyways, is an enigma. We don't know anything about him. We can't get into his devices. If we did get into his devices, maybe there's nothing there. No more questions are allowed to be asked about Thomas Crooks. The DHS IG is currently being blocked from investigating Butler as well. That's out in the media. That's all well known. Your investigative journalists found that Crooks did indeed have an online persona,
quite an
online footprint,
one.
And he was talking to people. So it's like, why aren't we investigating this? I mean, if
an attempted murder of a presidential
and then there's another assassination attempt. There's been multiple public breaches of President Trump's security over the last year. And then, Charlie Kirk is killed publicly in a very horrific way. And we're not really even allowed to look into that at all. And Charlie Kirk was one of President Trump's closest advisors. And he also advocated heavily against a war with Iran. He was in the Oval Office in the lead up to the 12-day war. I wasn't particularly close with Charlie. He was very gracious to me when I was running for Congress, very, very supportive. So we knew each other. And the last time I saw Charlie Kirk on this earth was in June in the West Wing in the stairway. And I said hi to him and he looked me in the eye and he said very loudly, and you've been in the West Wing. It's small. It's a tight space. And he said, Joe, stop us from getting into a war with Iran. Very loudly.
He was single-minded.
And he walked off and he went, I believe, into the Oval. So when one of President Trump's closest advisors, who is vocally advocating for us to not go to war with Iran and for us to rethink at least our relationship with the Israelis. And then he's suddenly publicly assassinated, and we're not allowed to ask any questions about that. It's a data point. It's a data point that we need to look into.
What do you mean when you say we're not allowed to ask any questions about that?
We've been told that this individual, Robinson, is a lone gunman, and maybe he is. But the investigation that I was a part of, the National Counterterrorism Center was a part of, we were stopped from continuing to investigate. And the FBI will say that they stopped that because they wanted to turn everything over to the Utah state authorities. Everything's going to trial. It's very, very sensitive. But there was still a lot for us to look into that I can't really get into. But there was still linkage for us to investigate that we needed to run down. And I'm not making any conclusions. I'm not saying
No.
Yeah, both of those are very strange. I don't think we're being told the truth about Butler, Pennsylvania, the assassination attempt on Trump, and then the Charlie Kirk situation. But I think the whole Charlie Kirk assassination, it's not, I don't think how Candace is making it out to be. I think a lot of the theories of that have been stretched, but what I think is definitely worth considering with that is why did they pave over the crime scene within a couple of days without, any sort of, like, that's not what you do when you investigate. Why did they stop the investigation? Why is the video of the shooter look kind of grainy? And like, why can't you see the actual video of him taking the shot? How did he get all the way home? Then how did after he told his dad turned him in after he somehow literally drove 350 miles after getting away? Like, what are the odds of that even happening? So I don't know. I think, again, it very well could be just, that's the easiest explanation. But again, until we know more about this, I don't believe the official narrative for either of those stories.
I don't think you are.
Because of this happened. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying there's unanswered questions. We know the pressure because of the text messages that have been made public, that Charlie was under a lot of pressure from a lot of pro-Israel donors. And again, we know Charlie was advocating to President Trump against this war with Iran. And we knew at the end of the 12-day war, at the end of Midnight Hammer, that the Israelis were going to come back and ask us to go back to war again.
Right.
So we have a lot of data points between Butler, the assassination attempts against President Trump, the breaches of his security, what happened to Charlie Kirk.
Can I just ask you to pause on the Charlie Kirk because it upsets me
Me too.
hear what you're saying, to be reminded that he was murdered, but also to hear you confirm what was reported in the media several months ago, that your office had been blocked from investigating his murder. That does not make sense to me. I don't understand why you would ever turn down help in an investigation from a U.S. agency with a lot of experience in gathering intelligence on things. That's your job.
The FBI will say, and the DOJ will say, that because it's an ongoing case, it's a Utah state case, that back off, they've got it. They've got a smoking case. They've got the fingerprints on the gun, and they've got the kid.
But the FBI was involved in the case.
The FBI was involved. The FBI's basically said that they're deferring to Utah because it's now a state case.
But they've established a precedent for federal investigation of this crime.
Yeah, and the National Counterterrorism Center's mandate is to investigate any foreign ties, to see if there's potentially any foreign ties. If we don't find any foreign ties, we back off. What I'm saying about getting into too much detail is there was more for us to investigate.
You believe there was reason to investigate foreign ties to Charlie Kirk's murder and were told by the FBI, DOJ?
FBI and DOJ, yeah.
No, you're not allowed to investigate that.
Stop. It's done. They basically cut off our access to be able to get into that information. And look, I didn't even say necessarily that I believe there's 100% foreign ties. There were data points that we needed to investigate. I mean, I think anybody who's even, looked at any kind of police investigation, you get 100 leads, you run them down, and 99 don't mean anything. We still had a lot more leads to run down that pertained to some kind of a foreign nexus that we were stopped from investigating. And,
that just strikes me as inconceivable that could happen. And again, I was aware of it from reading about it, but not really to the extent that you've just described. So I would love to hear the justification for that. And can you flesh that out a little bit more? What were you told was the reason to prevent you as a federal intelligence official running the National Counterterrorism Center from looking into the murder when you had reason to look into it?
Well, the way the bureaucracy works is they can just kill things in process. So initially we were cut off pretty early on from being able to access like the files and being able to, send people out there. We sent people out initially to work in the task force. After the crisis period, the first week or so, that dispersed, and we basically were told that, hey, we'll get back to you if we find any kind of foreign ties, et cetera, that we want you guys to look into. Meanwhile, we had already dug up a decent amount of leads. Again, I'm not saying that we had anything concrete, but we found more work that we needed to do to say that we had done our due diligence. We were then told that, hey, you guys need to stop. You can't work on this anymore. I had a bureaucratic dispute about it. Eventually, we were allowed to continue to investigate. But then in very short order, all the requests that we would make that normally different parts of the interagency with the FBI being on point would facilitate data share. Data sharing is a big thing that NCTC does. Those requests were just never met, or in my opinion, not an honest effort was given to fulfill those requests. Just basic information that any competent police service, which I believe Utah has, and the FBI, that they would have access to help us run down the leads to either confirm or deny some kind of foreign activity. So we were cut off from that. They didn't ever officially come back and say, you can't look at this anymore. All of the requests just continued to die on the vine with the various agencies that we needed to actually fulfill those requests.
I just can't imagine a legitimate justification for that. I mean, maybe I'm missing something, but from a non-specialist perspective, something horrible has happened. The U.S. government its core function is to investigate crime, particularly murder. Here you have an agency whose job it is to run down the rabbit trails you've described, and you're stopped from doing that. We don't want the information.
Right.
Why would any person engaged in a legitimate pursuit say, I don't want more information?
I mean, especially considering there was people posting online prior knowledge of what was about to happen. So a lot of the justification for stopping us from investigating hung on, hey, we've got the guy, his fingerprints are on the gun. We got video of him jumping off the roof. Like, this is a slam dunk case. Okay, even if it is a slam dunk case that he took the shot, what about all the people who had prior knowledge? All this, the basic investigative questions of how do you get there? You map it out. Nothing. This isn't rocket science. I mean, this is anything that anyone with common sense would know to ask. But basically, once they caught him, once he turned himself in and his fingerprints were on the gun, it was basically pencils down. Utah has the rest of it. There's nothing else to see here. And, I'm over there thinking I'm in crazy town saying like, no, we have all these different leads that we need to run down, just from my perspective. Now, the people who had prior knowledge, I believe most of them were American citizens. So that would be on the FBI to go run down. But again, not without saying anything specific, there was more work for us to do on the potential of a foreign nexus. Again, not saying there is one, but we had more work to do, and we were blocked from doing that.
I can't, my heart is pounding listening to this. I mean, I just would want people listening to this to assess two things. One, are you over your skis? Are you making claims you can't prove? No. Two, is there any conceivable motive, dark motive, that you would have for wanting to know more about this murder, to wanting to investigate it? And I don't think any rational person could construct a bad motive for wanting to know. It's your job.
Yeah.
It's the government's job. And so I think the onus is on people who are preventing the collection of information to describe why they're doing that. That's the question for them. Why wouldn't you want to know? Specifically, you may not know the answer. Of the people who demonstrated prior knowledge of Charlie Kirk's murder online, and there were a number of them, are you satisfied that all of them were interviewed by the FBI in person?
I have no idea. I don't know. I just think, considering they knew Charlie was going to be assassinated, and there was enough of them that it wasn't just some rando who maybe he tags every TPUSA post with that. There was enough of them that there's something there. I don't know what that something is.
Well, by definition.
But we haven't seen any arrests. So to me, there's more work to be done. And because that could have been posted from anywhere, that would be in the purview of the FBI or NCTC, or if they're overseas. And to me, I personally did not see any effort being taken to continue to run that down. Now, I'm sure they will say, hey, we're open to anything. We'll continue to investigate. But, we're coming up on several months now. Why hasn't this been done?
Are you bothered by it?
I'm very bothered by it. I'm very bothered by it. But I personally did not know Charlie well. But Charlie Kirk is a generational figure. I mean, he led a movement. He was speaking to millions of young Americans who came out and who voted for President Trump. And he was just a genuine great man, husband, father. I mean, how can you not like Charlie Kirk? But also the fact that he was murdered so publicly. And yes, there's been a lot of sympathy, and his movement has grown, et cetera. But actual curiosity about getting to justice, to figuring out what happened, that makes me furious that we're being blocked from that, and that we're not allowed to ask the question anymore. We're just not allowed to talk about it anymore. And I think that's absolute insanity. And what does that mean? What does that mean that there are people and there's entities out there that don't want us looking into this? And
well, I guess it's called the Trump administration right now.
I'm sure they're preparing the response right now, and they're saying that's because we don't want to screw up the Robinson trial. Like, okay, if the Robinson trial is so slam dunk, then don't worry about it. You know, he's got his fingerprints on the rifle, et cetera. But there was people publicly posting they had prior knowledge of this. And I'm here telling you, as someone who's involved in the investigation, there was more stones for us to overturn. And every time we asked, we were blocked. And then they, leaked to New York Times, and we had to blow up, and we had to throw them out of the room because they're crazy, et cetera. So it's incredibly frustrating that there's not more, especially considering how pivotal Charlie was to the MAGA movement and to President Trump, that there hasn't been a more concerted effort to find the truth and to find justice.
Do you think there will be?
I pray there is. I hope this helps. I know, you and I will probably take some flack for it.
I don't know why, and I doubt I'll be. Yeah, it's at a certain point. I've really tried not to say anything about it because I don't know the answers, but I want them to be found because I believe in justice and because I love Charlie. And but I think everything you have said, may be dismissed as crazy or evil. But tell me how. Right. With reference to the words you've just spoken, I don't see how someone could level a legitimate attack on you and won't stop them. You mentioned the breaches of the president's security that have been reported. One that was reported, and I can't say whether it's true. I'm only asking to see if you know that it is true. But it's been reported that Prime Minister Netanyahu's security detail was caught twice by Secret Service attaching some kind of device to the president's Secret Service emergency response vehicle. I don't know if that's true. Have you heard that?
I've read it in the media. I don't know if that's true.
Okay.
I think the president and the vice president and several members of the cabinet going out to dinner in D.C. and the Code Pink protesters having a heads up about that to rent the table. And that's hard to do. They had to figure out where they rent the table. They had to kind of get the restaurant on board to a certain extent. To me, that's kind of almost like counting coup. It's a soft flex. It's a I can touch you whenever I want. It was Code Pink. They weren't going to do anything. We know they're just going to be kind of crazy and annoying. However, what does that mean? It means you've got real problems with your security detail. And then, a few weeks later, you have an armed police officer who's off duty, who's not part of the president's detail, come right up and shake the president's hand. And the guy's probably patriotic American, whatever. He probably just wanted to shake the president's hand legitimately. But that got a lot of publicity. And what does that mean? And the president, again, President Trump is very smart. I think President Trump has a gift for interpreting large sets of data.
Yes.
And making very, very key strategic decisions. And so when the president sees that he's got issues with his own security detail, when he sees what happened in Butler with the other assassination attempts, when he sees what happened with Charlie, I think it's reasonable to believe that somewhere in his head, he thinks that maybe I don't have a choice. Maybe they could harm me or they could harm my family. And if they can't keep me safe, I believe the president deeply cares. I believe he's very courageous. I think if it was just a matter of he worried about his own physical safety, I don't think he cares. We saw that in Butler. But he does love his family, and he's got a big family. And so somewhere in his head, if they can't keep me safe, what about my family? So look, maybe the president was just simply deceived by the echo chamber we described, and that's how we got to this place. But it's also, there's a potential that there's an element of coercion, intimidation, whatever words you want to use there, that is also influencing his decision-making.
If you were assessing a similar situation in another country, a country not your own, and you as an expert on these questions, which obviously you are, I gave you the same data set you've just presented to me. And I said, would you say that's just crazy even to bring that up as a possibility?
Not at all. I mean, when you map out those data points, I would just say this moves from being a possibility to potentially, depending on how you look at it and interpret it, this could be a likelihood. It would be something that I'm sure that we would debate rigorously, but nobody would dismiss it altogether. With all this data, it's not nothing. It's something that has to be looked into.
Is it being looked into?
Again, I don't think it is. I think that with Butler, your investigative journalist found more about crooks than the entire government. And
the response I received from the FBI was so hostile that it confused me, and it still does confuse me a lot. It confuses me a lot since I didn't approach the question with anything like that in mind. I mean, we put this documentary out. We got information, the information you described. We got a lot of his online activity, which we've been told didn't exist. And this was not an attack on the FBI. This was, of course, during the last administration with a different director. So this was hardly a partisan hit job. This is the president of the United States, who I campaigned for and voted for and have liked for many years. So it's not an attack.
Mm-hmm.
And the response that I got was hysterical.
Yep.
That's not an overstatement.
Yep.
And it confuses me.
Yeah.
Have you had experiences like that?
Yeah, so I think we're going to cut it there. That's a pretty interesting interview. They covered a lot there. I think the main topic obviously was the Iran war and why we're entering this for Israel and not the United States. And every American should be aware of that. I was literally on Twitter a minute ago. I'm just battling these people because I cannot stand that these 30-year commentators like Scott Jennings and Glenn Beck and Bill O'Reilly, the most credible and trustworthy news sources out there, they're openly lying about this to help a foreign country capture America and push their agenda forward. That is the utmost worst way you can betray your country. And it's one of two things. And I'm more inclined to believe these guys have a little bit of an IQ to understand what they're doing. They're intentionally selling us out. But I'm sure there are some that are just literally idiots and they have no idea. They're just going along with this and they're fools. They're the good boys. They're doing exactly what the puppets want them to, whether they know it or not. But that's my thing. People like Joe Kent are getting slandered online because he's speaking the truth about the occupation of America. And thank God someone like Tucker had him on and they had this conversation. I guarantee this is going to wake up even more people, especially I think something like this with Joe Kent, who's a veteran. He was a guy that I believe he's either a Gen Xer. I don't know. He's definitely not a boomer, but comes from the older generations. It's not like he's just like Gen Z guy or like this younger person with radical progressive ideas. I think this is going to really make people in the military think, and especially the grandparents and the people with kids now. I think they're really going to start to think about these these random little Instagram reels where it's accusing Israel of controlling the world. Some may be a little sarcastic and a little over exaggerated for comedic purposes, but yeah, there is some truth to that. And I think people are really starting to see that. And people like me who have been saying this for at least a couple years now, all of us coming to light, and we're starting to get the credibility we deserve. And people like Scott Jennings, all the clowns that are literally taking their seven-figure salary just to hang out at the bathhouse and be in the good boys club and get their connection with Trump. These guys are selling out America. And again, that's bad. But I think what's even worse is the people who are elected and put in positions of power by us to not do these things. No one voted for a war with Iran. And Joe Kent's assessment is 100% right. And I'm sure with this heroic act of him resigning, admitting this, and going on Tucker, I think he's going to be appointed in a future administration once this country is captured again by Americans and Christians and people who actually want to put this country first. People who are going to bring down the national debt. People who are going to prosecute and arrest Epstein's clients. People that are not going to get us into any more of these foreign wars, and we're going to get out of these wars. Like, these things have to happen. And once we have something like that, people like Joe Kent, Thomas Massey, I believe they will be rewarded for their sacrifice, for putting themselves last and putting the country first, unlike every other politician has done. And again, this is big. I'm glad this happened. This is a major, monumental shift. And of course, Joe Kent, his legacy is going to be destroyed in the MAGA world because of this, which, how how really important is that anymore? Because MAGA, in my eyes, is dead. The movement's completely fractured. It's shattered. There's really nothing left. It's just Lindsey Graham, Mark Levin, Laura Loomer, Ben Shapiro, Ted Cruz, Ben Ferguson, all the never Trumpers, and the people that actually do support Trump and did way back in 2016 are just the forgotten about Americans. And, we're just basically traitors. We're just our agenda that we once had in common. It's gone. There is no truth to that anymore. It's as if it never existed. But people like me don't forget. We don't have a short memory. We remember what that policy was like in 2016, what it was like in 2015 when Trump came down the escalator, when he literally challenged Jeb Bush and destroyed his campaign after calling out George Bush for being a war criminal and basically getting us into Iraq for no reason. So yeah, we've seen those values be completely destroyed, and people like Tucker, people like Joe Kent, Megyn Kelly, you're starting to see a lot of people wake up to this. They're not the ones that switched up. Always understand that. They didn't switch up, Trump did. One more time. Trump was against these wars. Trump was not aligned with Lindsey Graham, Ben Shapiro. The whole Israel First crowd was against Trump when he was independent. He said he would not take their money at the Republican Jewish coalition in 2015. He said Marco Rubio would, but Trump said he wouldn't. Then in 2024, Trump took $230 million from the Israel lobby and Miriam Adelson, and that comes with strings attached. That's how Trump won that election after October 7th. Israel wants to expand the Middle East. They want a war with Iran. And Trump was going to make that happen. That's what Miriam Adelson bought. She bought a war with Iran and basically to do whatever Trump would do foreign policy-wise for them whenever they want. That's what it is. You have to understand that money talks, especially in politics. That's basically what it's built off of. There's hardly any ethics that go into it. I'll be fully honest, working in politics for a couple years, it definitely does corrupt almost everyone to at least the smallest extent. But the very rare and few in between, like the Thomas Masseys, the people that really will not be corrupted, they're out there, and we need more of them. But someone like Trump literally did a 180 on everything he once stood for, and I don't know how you can't see that. Maybe it's because the Fox News programming is that good. Maybe it's because they've figured out how people thought all these years, and they just say the same propaganda, and it works, literally, with Iraq. Weapons of mass destruction. This time, Iran's going to build a nuclear program and destroy America. They're going to bomb California. That's what literally ABC reported at one point. So, I mean, it's ridiculous that we're falling for this again. And honestly, I'm disappointed. I've seen a lot of people on X, especially, of course, the boomers, like the true MAGA people, even with an unnecessary, unprovoked war with Iran that goes against what Trump is about and everything he stood for, they still will side with Trump. And again, that's where you lose me. That is inherently where it's a cult, because you have to hold these people accountable, even if it's a biased situation when it's the guy you voted for. It's like, no, you have to hold them accountable. I stand with the vision, not with the man. I think that's what we should have stood by with MAGA. That's what MAGA was. It's about making America great again. It wasn't about making Trump great again. It wasn't about making Israel great again, because that's what it's turned into. And again, I'm America first. So here's the thing. I would be betraying my own values to support what Trump's doing right now, or I'd be betraying Trump because he switched up on his values. So, I mean, do I really want to betray what I believe? Because if I'm America first, I can't believe putting Israel first. I can't believe starting an unnecessary war for them and lying about it to the American people, saying that this is America first and this is in our interest, when it's literally not. They're just bought and sold by a freaking foreign country, and they're literally betraying us. I think this is one of the ultimate acts of treason. And it's not just Trump that's done this. It's George Bush. It's Obama, Biden in a sense. The only credit you give Biden is that he actually did not go as far as Trump. And that's probably why Biden didn't win. It was literally Trump, because he would do this for Israel. He would go farther than anyone else ever would. And that's where we're at today. The one thing that Trump has been consistent about is he has always said he doesn't want Iran to have nuclear weapons. Even though I disagree with the principle there, he's always said that. So that's the only thing I'll say that he's been consistent on. But he screwed up the Iran nuclear deal. It was perfectly in place to where Iran could enrich uranium, which held Israel in check. It balanced out Israel. The second you tell Iran they don't have the capability to defend themselves and have a deterrent to Israel, who's literally threatening to overthrow their country, you have literally made this you have unbalanced the scale, and you've allowed Israel to be the aggressor. And we saw that. They attacked first, or they were going to attack first. And because if we didn't, Rubio said, our troops would be at risk because Israel was going to do it anyway. So that's why they felt compelled to do it first. So you see where this is going? I mean, this is one of the worst things I think I've ever seen in my lifetime. It's one of the most blatant acts of foreign infiltration. And I think the difference with this and the Bush administration is because of the decentralization of media, because of Twitter, Rumble, even Instagram starting to be leaning into their policies, YouTube. That was obviously not a factor in 2002, 2003. I don't even think YouTube was even created until maybe around that time, 2006 maybe. And it was not even 20 years old. So you're really seeing all this broadcasted and live streamed in real time, whether it's the war, whether it's the blatant corruption of our Congress and the White House even. Like, I don't think the average person was seeing this information out there that about the Israel lobby, about where the corruption really lies, because that's what they want to hide from you. They've always done that with mainstream media, with Fox News, CNN. It's both sides. They're all funded by the same people, and the way that they can keep everything the same, and where we don't change the country at all, we actually don't make any difference, is that there's a secret handshake between both parties to make sure this happens, to make sure they support more wars, to make sure that we don't ever fix the debt, we increase the debt, to make sure that nothing really changes. I mean, the right supports more immigration just legally. The left supports more immigration illegally. It's just two sides of the same coin. And I think people are waking up to that. That's why I genuinely hope in 2028 we actually get an independent candidate, someone who's outside the box. And again, maybe they're a Republican, they run on the Republican ticket, but I think we need someone to truly run like a George Washington, like completely separate from the political donors, the political class, the establishment, all this like traditional stuff that has been plaguing our system for its existence. Excuse me, mumbled a little starter there, but yeah, that's the thing. It's like this is the thing that has been destroying our country forever. And if we get like a Tucker Carlson, a Thomas Massey, I mean, someone who literally, you can see that they're standing on their own principles, like for the better, for the worse. They're willing to be America first and criticize the president and his policies. Like, that's something that you can really tell whether someone's authentic or not. Are they talking on both sides of the argument here? Are they actually open to criticizing Trump? And actually, when he does something good, can you give him credit for that? Which I do. It's very hard nowadays, but yeah, I mean, I gave him credit for freeing the J6ers. I gave him credit for the tariffs at first, Liberation Day last May. Like, I thought it was laid out pretty well, but they didn't execute it well. Hardly any of the tariffs went through. So that's my problem with it. And I think if anyone actually has been paying attention, you can really understand as to why people have gone against him. And it's not that people like me have switched up on Trump. It's that Trump has switched up on me and everyone else. And there's so much proof in the pudding. And this whole interview with Joe Kent and Tucker Carlson really does tell you that, yeah, there is a lot of truth to that. So yeah, long rant there. Just, I feel like that was worth talking about. That's going to be a big precedent in this war moving forward. I think you're going to see other officials step down and start speaking out as well. Just like Joe Kent, it's a domino effect. Just like we talked about a few weeks ago or last week with the Brian McGinnis guy, who ended up, storming into a congressional meeting or whatever it was, and said that Americans don't want to die for Israel, and now he's like famous, and he probably is going to win as a Green Party candidate in Congress. I'm sorry, or was it? I think it was North Carolina. He's running for Congress. But yeah, that's what you're seeing. You're going to see a domino effect of people start speaking out, and I really do believe that. I think that's the white pill to come. Even though that this war is going to be terrible, I think this is going to be an absolutely detrimental war. We're seeing gas almost $4 a gallon in my state of Kentucky, with the Strait of Hormuz being shut down. It's probably going to get worse than that as time goes on. We're not even seeing troops on the ground yet. I think, or U.S. troops, boots on the ground in Iran. We're going to see that in the future. I really believe that because of the USS Tripoli. You don't send that amphibious boat out there without the intent of doing something like that. And once we do this, you can't go back. Once we send troops on the ground, that is it. We're going to be there for a long time. And I think that's where it's headed, unfortunately. But people have to speak up. We have to know that the administration has betrayed us. They failed us. And now it's time to make sure that these Republicans learn. And everyone who supports the wars learn. They can't win the midterms. And in 2028, whoever wins, and I really hope it's not a Democrat, but it cannot be a Marco Rubio, a J.D. Vance, the people in this administration who have let us down. They need to have a wake-up call that they cannot do this and get away with it. Even though a lot of Trump supporters still won't hop off the Trump train, they're essentially brainwashed. They're NPCs. They will not think for themselves, and they don't even do the research I'm doing. They're not talking about the things we're talking about on this show. They're probably watching Fox News or some moron on TikTok. So that's what it is. And we don't actually, we don't actually have a country that's going to see things right until we have a majority, which I think young people do, see the truth for what it is about the Middle East, about Israel, about AIPAC, about all these things. Because the boomers, once they're phased out of politics, I think that's a big reason that we're being held back here. I think So I think that's the thing. So boomers holding us back here is definitely an issue. But yeah, once they're out of politics, Trump and all them, Lindsey Graham, a big change is coming. And that's what the ADL, that's what all these organizations are worried about, because they can't have the left and the right and the youth both agree that Israel is a problem and they shouldn't be an ally. Again, could culminate into something that gets both sides, both Gen Z left and right, to support the same candidate, support an independent candidate, or maybe, both parties will vote for a Republican, both parties will vote for a Democrat because they run on the same principle. They're America first, anti-Israel. And you know what? It might stem down to things like, the biggest issue with the left is if they could just capitulate on immigration, if they could just understand that no more illegal immigrants, and legal immigrants need to be put to a moratorium as well. It needs to be put to a halt. If they're open to doing that, if they're open to be nationalists about immigration and understand, the diaspora of this, of white people, if they understand this, then I would make concessions for something like healthcare. You know what? If you guys are willing to have a border wall, no more immigrants, then maybe I'd be open to something like maybe universal healthcare, even though it's almost impossible with the system we have right now. I'd be open to something like that, or at least a more of a distributionist mindset. But it's all up to them. So again, I'm not banking on that. I don't think working with the left is probably going to pan out. I don't think it's probably the best idea because, again, you saw what they did to someone like Charlie Kirk. You've seen the things that they've done in these big cities with these big protests. It's always because of them. It's because of it's the same deal. It's always these blue cities. So anyway, that's my take on all this. We're about 2 hours in. This is the reaction to Tucker Carlson and Joe Kent's interview, and we talked about a few other things in between. This is day 21, I believe, day 20 of the war in Iran, and we'll be covering this next week. Next Monday, our next episode will be episode 101 and the 3-year anniversary of the Kacee Allen Show. So we're going to do next week a little bit differently. We're going to have a whole show dedicated to the upbringing of the show, kind of more of a bit of a personal background on myself rather than focus on the news stories. Although afterwards, we're going to have a long show tomorrow. We're going to have a long show Monday, and we will talk about the Iran war. We're going to be talking about whatever happens in the news that day. But stay tuned. We're going to have a special episode 101, coming this Monday. And this is a 3-year anniversary of this independent and very growing and very truthful show. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Make sure to follow us on all platforms. You can see the banners below. If you want to donate to our locals community, CaceeAllenShow.locals.com. Follow us on YouTube. So make sure to subscribe, youtube.com @Kacee Allen Show. Thanks for tuning in. We will see you guys tomorrow.